What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Today, we're going to talk about networking. Yeah, networking. It's a thing. If you're allergic to networking, don't X out of this episode. It is still for you. Let me clarify that I'm not talking about those stuffy, awkward, meet and greet type networking meetings that sound a little something like this. Okay, so I work with all kinds of clients: anxiety, depression, trauma, substance abuse, ADHD, autism, adults, kids, couples, groups. I've worked in schools, the criminal justice system, and hospitals. So if you know of anyone who might be a good fit for my specialty, here's my card and feel free to send folks my way. Honestly, I personally can't stand those types of meetings. It's nothing against the meetings themselves or the people there, but for me, I just immediately become a version of myself that I don't love. It's like my body's sending out like a little red alert, like, Awkward Marie has arrived in the chat. Awkward Marie has arrived in the chat. And I know I'm not the only one who feels this way. I mean, so many of us are allergic to these networking meetings, mixers, meet and greets. Personally, I don't think I've ever received a referral from a meeting like that. I don't think I've ever made any kind of meaningful connection. Again, partly because I'm showing up in such an awkward state, and I think other people are doing the same oftentimes as well. So then we're just all in this awkward scenario together where we're all coming with our walls up and not really getting to see each other for who we really are. But just because all of that might be true, I don't think the solution is to throw networking out the window. We just need a better approach to networking. So in this episode, I'm going to share some of my own takes on the do's and don'ts of networking. Yes, to fill your practice, but also, to make meaningful connections. Maybe find a friend, maybe find a colleague that you can consult with. So it's not just about filling your practice, but about connecting with others in a meaningful way. Now, before I dive into the do's and don'ts, I want to preface by saying, I don't actually believe there's a wrong way to do networking. If you're really into those mixer, meet and greet type networking meetings, I fully support you. You do it. I just think there's a lot of folks who spend a lot of energy trying to lean into those things because they think that's what they're supposed to do, but they actually hate every minute of it, or it just feels like you're putting in so much energy for very little fruit. And so if that's you, I'm going to offer some tools to help streamline your networking process so that your efforts are much more fruitful. But yeah, if you love those mixers and meet and greets, keep going. I support you. Okay, so let's dive into some of the do's and don'ts of effective networking. First, know what you bring to the table. Whether you're looking to fill your practice through networking or if you're just trying to make a friend, saying something like, "Hi, I'm a therapist looking for other therapists," just isn't specific enough. It's helpful to know a bit about who you are, even if you're not clear on things like what your specialties, your niche are, to have a clear sense of you as a person. What are your passions? What are the things that you get really excited about? What are some kind of key pieces of your life story that have shaped your experiences? And be really connected to those things. And certainly it is really helpful if you are aware of things like your therapy niche, your specialties, and other kind of professional attributes as well that are specific to you. Definitely connect with those, know what those are, and have those with you before you meet another therapist. If you stay super vague and it's just sort of I'm a therapist looking for therapists, it kind of starts to feel like an online dating profile where all you see is the picture, but there's absolutely no bio. And listen, I get that that is the entire concept of major dating apps, but I think you could also make an argument that if you were looking for a genuine connection, you might have to go through a whole lot of people's photos before you land on someone that's actually quite compatible for you. And if you had a bit more of a bio that was more specific, you might get to expend less energy on kind of sifting through those bios before you land on someone who's a bit more compatible. My second networking tip is to know what you're looking for. If your singular goal is to just get people to refer to you, you're going to face an uphill battle. Here's my specialty: Send me clients, please. Thanks. It's not particularly memorable, compelling, or trust building. And when professionals refer to each other, we refer to people who we trust. So the goal really needs to emphasize on knowing what you're wanting and what kind of trust building connection you can build together, rather than just saying like, hey, send me referrals, please. Thank you. So rather than thinking of networking as a mission to get more referrals to your practice, think of networking as an opportunity to build genuine relationships. And here's the thing, I think this is a winning situation because I talk all the time on this channel about how isolated therapists are, how prevalent burnout is amongst therapists, which is in part connected to isolation, and how we need to have more genuine connections with fellow therapists. And it could be with professionals in general in the community so that we feel like we have our cheerleaders out there. We have the people that we can call upon if we need to consult. We have people who are genuine friends who are also in this profession. So if we see networking as an opportunity to build our trustworthy circles of professionals and therapists, that's only going to benefit us on every level. And yes, if we have a genuine connection with those people, they're going to refer to us and we're going to refer to them also. So rather than asking who can refer clients to you, I encourage you to ask the question of like, what is it that you're looking for from these networking relationships? Like, are you really looking to make therapist friends or maybe colleagues that you can consult with as needed, or maybe other professionals in the community that'd be really helpful to have connections with? Then once you have a sense of who you are and what kind of connection you're wanting to make when you network with other folks, then you can get to know what sorts of folks you want to connect with. This is the part where we actually try to identify people that you're wanting to connect with, whether you're thinking about categories of spaces where you might be able to find those sorts of people that would fit well given who you are and what kind of connection you're trying to make, or it might be like specific people that you found through a Google search or you found on social media, or even by asking within your existing networks. So for example, I specialize in working with folks who often feel marginalized or misunderstood by the church. And so I might find it quite helpful to, one, connect with other therapists who have very similar specialties as I do, but it's also really helpful for me to connect with folks like church clergy who are more progressive in their views or whose church is LGBTQ affirming, because it is hard to find others in our niche, not just therapists, but professionals in general. So given that that's where I'm at and that might be the kind of connection that I'm looking for, then I might do a Google search for therapists with some of these shared specialties as me, or I might start to look for churches that say that they are LGBTQ affirming, for example, and kind of utilize that as a tool to help me find those spaces. And I might just like ask around in my existing friends, like, do you know of any local like spiritual communities that are rather progressive? Like maybe I can connect with those. And there's no need to like rush and email blast all of those people as soon as you find them. Like just take your time with it. Make a list as you go and just kind of get a sense of who's out there. Like what kinds of folks would it make sense for me to connect with given some of these things that I'm looking for? In addition to doing Google searches and asking around in your existing networks, you might find it helpful to explore social media, like social media hashtags, or if there's something like a specific Facebook group for the type of professional or type of therapist specialty that you're focused on, things like that, you might be able to sort of niche down in where you're doing your searches. Okay, now the next step, I think, is probably the most valuable step in my list, because we might just say, okay, you found these people, why don't you just go ahead and reach out to them? But the way that you reach out is so important. But before we dive into that, we're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor, Powbox. HIPAA compliance is always top of mind for me, so I was completely surprised when I learned that Google Workspace and Microsoft 365 alone are not enough to be HIPAA compliant, even if you have a signed BAA with them. I know. That's why a little over a year ago, I started using Powbox, which is the simplest, most effective solution for mental health professionals to seamlessly integrate HIPAA security into your email, all while using your favorite email provider. I genuinely was surprised by how easy it was to set up. In about 10 minutes, I had Powbox set up and fully integrated with my Google Workspace, and I haven't had to touch it once since then. But I can rest assured knowing it's keeping all my clients' correspondence with me secure without having to log into a portal to communicate with them. If you'd like to give Powbox a try, they're running a great offer right now where the first 100 people who say my name at signup get $250 off their first year. To get the deal, just head to powbox.com and mention Marie Fang at signup. That's Powbox spelled Paubox.com. Thank you so much to Powbox for sponsoring this episode. And now back to that tip. All right, at this point you might be thinking, all right, cool, I got my list. Now I just go reach out to them. But not all forms of reaching out are created equal. Let me tell you, the way that you reach out to somebody you're trying to network with is so important. I'll explain a little bit more why. But with that said, my next tip is to make an authentic elevator pitch. Listen, I know that phrase elevator pitch sounds salesy, and we were just talking about how important it is to make authentic, genuine connections. So why are we doing this salesy marketing thing? I would suggest that we see the elevator pitch as our streamlined format for making genuine connections. It's so important that you find a relatively brief yet specific and accurate way to present yourself to somebody who may be a complete stranger and might be wondering, like, why should I give this person the time of day? So the elevator pitch allows us to present ourselves in a way that feels authentic, is specific, but is also brief, so that somebody might actually take a moment to read that email or listen to that voicemail or however you might be reaching out and say, okay, I can read 3 sentences of an email to see what's going on here. Most people, when they present themselves in a networking pitch, will have a rather lengthy message. If, let's say, it's an email to somebody they've never met, I get these emails and they're often minimum 3 paragraphs long. As soon as I open an email and I see that it's multiple paragraphs long, like, it doesn't matter how meaningful, how connective the content within that email is, because it's so long, I just simply don't have the time to read all of those emails. And unfortunately, I X out of them. And I get the desire to make these massive emails because you don't want to send an email just saying, hi, I'm Dr. Marie Fang. Want to connect? Winky face. Like, you want to show who you really are and make a genuine connection. So people will fill in very significant details in these networking emails, like a whole backstory on here's some of the things that have been going on leading me to want to reach out to someone like you. Here's some of my professional experience thus far and some spaces where maybe I'm feeling stuck or I could do with some support. And so I was wondering, maybe if it's possible, would you potentially be free to maybe hang out or answer this question I have, or just make a connection because I think you're cool. Thanks. And as nice as all of that sounds, like, when you haven't met somebody yet and they're giving you this really long pitch, then it could start to feel like somebody's proposing to you and you haven't even gone on your first date yet. And I don't mean to offend anybody as I say that, because maybe some of you who have sent me an email like this that I didn't respond to are listening, and hello, I think you're great. But also, if you get 10 of those, 20 of those a day, like, you can't even read all of them, let alone respond to them. So I completely empathize with the motivation to say, let me fill in some details so this person gets a really clear sense of who I am and why I'm reaching out. But the reality is, whoever's receiving your message has no idea who you are, so they may not even read your email. or they might read your email and feel like it's coming off too strong and then still not respond. And another characteristic that tends to come through in these types of messages, aside from them being rather lengthy, is they tend to be very focused on the person writing the email. Like, here's my background, here's my passion, here's my story, my experiences, here's my, professional credentials and all of that. And very little about like, here's where the two of us could meet together. I think I've thought about this. I see you, this is me, and us side by side makes sense in some way. And so that piece is also missing most of the time from these types of emails. And I'm saying emails, but I see this in my DMs on Instagram, like anywhere that people reach out to each other and connect. It's kind of the same thing. And I get that not everyone's going to be getting, probably as many messages like this as I am, since I have some online presence. But even then, I think a lot of therapists aren't responding to this kind of networking email, even if they're not getting that many of them so often, because it does kind of feel like, here's a complete stranger who just showed up in my inbox and told me a whole bunch about themselves, and they're asking me for something, and I have no idea who they are or why they're asking me. And so I think a lot of therapists do X out of those emails as well. And I'm saying therapists, but it could be, medical professionals or whatever kind of person you might be reaching out to. They might be going through a very similar thought process. Now, even with all that said, I do respond to some networking messages. So it's not like I see a networking message and I X out. It's when I see the very lengthy message that I X out. The messages that I respond to tend to just be a few sentences long and are very specific and to the point. They're going to emphasize, this is who I am, this is why I'm reaching out, and here's how I think the two of us make sense to connect together. Messages like those are super effective for me. I tend to respond to them universally, even if it's not a connection that I'm going to make in an ongoing way. It's just easy for me to respond, first of all, which I assume is helpful, of like, hey, maybe I'm a little busy right now. I might not be able to follow through, but thanks for your message. But a lot of those emails, I actually connect with the folks on the other end and, make a new friend, make a new colleague connection, make a new referral connection, just because somebody was clear enough in their message that it felt really easy for me to respond. Okay, so how do you make an effective, authentic elevator pitch? First, name something specific that's personal to you. Name something specific about the person or organization you're reaching out to that kind of makes it obvious why you're reaching out to them, and then be specific about what kind of connection you're wanting to make together. So here's an example of what not to do, something non-specific. Hi, I'm a fellow therapist in San Diego specializing in depression. I'd love to connect. Though this message is brief, it's really not clear what sorts of things we might connect on aside from being in the same geographical area, and it's not really clear what it is that they want from me when they're asking to connect. So when you're making your elevator pitch, you're making it specific both about yourself and the other person that you're reaching out to and what type of connection you want to have together. So given that I'm a therapist who specializes in working with folks who feel marginalized by the church, if I were reaching out to another therapist who, let's say, had a similar specialty as I do, I might write an email that sounds something like this. Hello, so-and-so. I'm a fellow progressive Christian therapist in San Diego. I was so excited to see that you specialize in working with LGBTQ Christian couples because I often have trouble finding folks with similar specialties as me. If you're available, I'd love to connect over coffee or Zoom just to hear more about what you do and also to connect in general. So it does take a teensy bit longer to make all of those specifications about like, here's who I am. I see something about who you are, and I'd love to connect because there's something probably mutually beneficial for both of us. But it doesn't need to be, multiple paragraphs. It might be 3 sentences. But for me, when I get an email that sounds something like this, I'm very inclined to respond. Like, even if I'm not available to meet for a coffee or a Zoom or anything like that, I'm at least going to say like, oh, sweet, it's so nice to meet you. Maybe I'm not available to meet up just now, but I've definitely noted that you're there and I'd love to check in sometime in the future. I might have some referrals for you. Like, even if it's a decline, I'm still going to respond in some form because, yes, I do want to make that connection with somebody who's like that. So they really pitched it to me in a way that I'm bought into whatever they're looking for. And one very important note on this that I wish I didn't have to say, but it is so important that you tailor your elevator pitch to each person that you reach out to. Like maybe you have some kind of template that you're working from. You don't have to rewrite a new thing every single time. But because it's brief, you don't have to write out, multiple paragraphs to each new person you reach out to. And when you tailor it to each person, then you can write something specific about them that really can capture their attention because it's authentic and they're going to be listening to what you're saying because you clearly looked at their website or their bio, their Instagram, whatever it is. You heard about them from your friend so-and-so that is a mutual friend and they said this nice thing about them. Like whatever your point of connection is or the thing that you're kind of drawn to, name something about that for that person or for that organization. The amount of times that I get copy and pasted emails that clearly are copy and pasted where they'll say something like, "Oh, I love watching you on YouTube and TikTok," and da 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 da, and then 3 paragraphs, and I think like, I'm not even on TikTok. So you clearly sent this message to somebody else in addition to me and like copy and pasted. You couldn't even be bothered to delete the TikTok part and customize it to me. For all I know, based on just that little thing, this person copy and pasted this to 50 other people. So I just kind of X out of the email. But when something is customized to me specifically and somebody lays out so clearly how our specialties overlap, our interests overlap, we have some shared reason for wanting to connect, I remember those people and I will come back to them. Even if I didn't get back to their email, I'll come back to them 6 months later and say, "Oh, this other thing came up. You reached out. I'm so sorry. I didn't get back to you, but I remembered your email and now I'm circling back because something new popped up," right? So those messages stand out in my memory. And I hope I'm conveying something that's important to me in this episode, that it's not just about filling your practice to me. Like, I really think that our profession in general would do well with stronger connections, therapists being more interconnected in general in a way that feels genuine and not this sort of like carrying this wall of professionalism with like, your like awkward side coming out the whole time or your kind of self-inflated side coming out. I've done that one before too. But just like being your actual self, creating spaces where it's safe enough to do that, advocating for creating spaces like that by, reaching out to each other in ways like what I presented here as an example. And, not being so lonely, not being so isolated. Like, let's be friends. Can we find ways to forge those friendships, those connections, those like strong professional collegiate connections? Is that the right term? I don't know. Let's make more connections that are healthy in our profession. And yes, is it a byproduct that you get more referrals through networking as a result? Absolutely. Is it still possible to fill your practice through networking alone? Absolutely. I do know people who have filled their practice through networking in modern times, you might say. So all of these things are all benefits, but it's not just about like, how do I get more clients? And it's more about like, how do I be a healthy person in this ecosystem of our profession? And yet, naming this for those of y'all listening to the podcast version of this episode, that some of my dearest friends I met online, like therapists, and honestly, it's mostly people who reached out to me and not the other way around. So kudos to them for being, the bigger people in these situations. But like, I've made some very meaningful connections with folks that I met through email, through Instagram. I mean, I have one dear friend that I'm literally flying to Portugal to go see, who met me through Instagram DMs years ago. Shout out to Dr. Therese Moscardo. Can't wait to see you soon, my friend. But yeah, there's like real humans on the internet that you can meet. And it's how wonderful is it that, we have this way of being able to connect with people who are potentially really far away, or just, back in the day, you just had like the phone book. So you can only know so much through that. So I'm really grateful that there are opportunities for us to connect even though we also know that the interconnectedness of the internet and social media actually tends to make us more disconnected. So let's use those tools in a way that serves us rather than in a way that, disconnects us. Well, thank you for hanging with me in this episode. I realized it had been a little while since we talked about networking, and I actually love networking when we do it in the way that I talked about in this episode. Let me know in the comments if you would add to these tips, if there's any tools you've struck upon that make networking more effective, more successful for you. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.